Yeah, so. Ah, okay. You remember to record it, that's good. So Stephanie, when did you get back to Virginia lately? Have you get back there?
I was back there in early September.
Family did.
Yeah, and like watched Osprey, like catching fish at Virginia Beach in the ocean, which was pretty fun.
Still seeing some osprey around here a little bit, yeah. Good. Well, Stephanie has a BS in biology from the University of Richmond, Master's in Science and Ecology, Evolutionary Biology from Iowa State. And it's been 25 years now as a wildlife professional. She's worked in Virginia, Missouri, and now with the Iowa DNR Wild Diversity Program on game. So she does a lot of things with non-game things with butterflies, bees, pollinators, you name it. I don't know. I tell her often, I don't know how you do it. It's, all the DNR people are so lucky to have them. They're so passionate about what they do. They really care. They really work hard. So we're very, very happy to have Stephanie with us today. So Stephanie, take it away.
Thanks so much. Thanks for having me, and thanks to all of you who have participated in some of our surveys at one point or another, or still are. So I'm excited to be here and talk about this. Tom's like request to me was kind of thinking about what has, kind of success stories of the diversity program, and also talking about the volunteer programs. And so it was really broad, and I started to dive into it and realized I hadn't left myself enough time to really get into all of it. It would have been a 6-hour presentation. And I figured y'all weren't that interested, so listen to these. But so this may be a little bit all over the place, but my main goal is for folks to feel positive about what's going on with non-game in Iowa, because there is a lot of good things. There's some bad things too, but we've really come a long way, even from the start of the diversity program, and just the work we're doing, in the amount of people that are involved. And honestly, it's all of you folks that enjoy birds, who get involved with community science, that really make things happen. I truly believe that Iowans are at heart very connected to the land and to nature, and really care about it. And you can tell by kind of how things have gone. So I hope you walk out if you're feeling a little positive, just for a change. If you want to go to the next slide. So in the olden times, this is kind of what wildlife management in Iowa looked like. So there was non-game wildlife was being supported through habitat management, but it wasn't the point of the wildlife management. Really, the focus was on the game species: turkey, deer, pheasant, the fur bearers like coyote and fox. And in creating habitat and managing habitat for those species, a lot of non-game species were helped as well as a lot of land was protected. Move to the next slide. So the reason why there was all this focus on game is that funding for game species management has been in place for a century now. So game species are regulated. That means that hunters and fishermen have to buy licenses. Those licenses then get cycled back into management for those species to make sure that we have thriving populations and good habitat for those species. And then on top of that, in the 20s and 30s, the federal Congress, it's kind of hard to believe this, but they passed bills. And one of the bills that they passed, Pittman Robertson, was really essential. It basically put an excise tax on firearms, ammunition, bows, everything that you use to hunt. And then again, that money was spread among the states who regulate hunting and went back into the thing. And the similar thing happened with fishing with the Dingle Johnson. So you can go on. So non-game hasn't really had, didn't really have a dedicated funding source. Basically, hunters and fishermen were paying for conservation, and have been, and still are paying the vast majority of conservation, for conservation and nature. But in the 1980s, things were kind of coming to a head. We had the Endangered Species Act in the 1970s, and there was a realization that just managing for game species, while it did support a lot of non-game species, there were also a lot of songbirds, insects, small mammals that had more specific requirements than our game species, and that we needed to step up our game for non-game in order to make sure that they weren't all getting added to the endangered species list. Excuse me. I hope I didn't just cough into the microphone. So in Iowa, this came to be in 1981 when the Living Resources Program was established with 2 staff. That's like the precursor to the Wildlife Diversity Program. And it shifted pretty quickly to the Wildlife Diversity Program because I was looking at one of our newsletters from 1985 and we had already been renamed the Wildlife Diversity Program. And what made this possible, basically hiring 2 staff whose complete job was dedicated to focusing on non-game wildlife, was the chickadee checkoff, which the state legislature put on our tax forms in 1982. And donations came in to support non-game wildlife conservation. These are totally voluntary. These aren't tax dollars. These are voluntary donations that were just made possible through the state tax form. And that's what was the basis of this program. And you can see this was the act that got it started, and not less than 50% of the funds derived from the checkoff shall be used for the purposes of preserving, protecting, perpetuating, and enhancing non-game wildlife in the state. And, I kind of hide this from our higher ups and from our leadership because we get 100% of these funds, but the statute actually says not less than 50%. So we've been lucky that we do get 100% of the funds from the chickadee checkoff. And I guess I'll talk a little bit more about funding in a little bit and kind of how it's going towards the end, but transitioning a little bit to talking about what the Wildlife Diversity Program is. We're the non-game program. We're the folks that are focused on non-game wildlife. We now have 5 staff, and kind of since 2005-ish, our main goal has been to help implement the Iowa Wildlife Action Plan, which has this 30-year plan that has plans for wildlife conservation, for habitat restoration, for all the things. We established lists of species that are species of greatest conservation need, that are in most need, are most in danger of becoming threatened and endangered, and that we can maybe proactively get into some conservation for those species and potentially keep them off the list. So it was a very proactive thing. And this got created, again, along with some federal funding, which I'll talk about later. And along with that federal funding, Congress said every state and tribal nation has to create one of these wildlife action plans. And that's where this came from in 2005. So we're kind of nestled in the Conservation and Recreation Division at the DNR. There's a whole nother half of the DNR, the Environmental Services Division, that deals with water quality, air quality, confined animal feeding operations, etc. But on our side, we have fisheries, wildlife, law enforcement, parks, that kind of stuff. And we are in the Wildlife Bureau, which is one of the bigger bureaus in the Con and Rec Division, and we are nestled under research. But we do, and actually all of us in research kind of serve support roles for our management unit staff too, who are out there doing the physical rodent management. So we're working with them and helping them to know about best practices for non-game wildlife, and on the game species side, game species. Our main goals, you want to click through, maintain faunal diversity, so conservation, encourage public awareness of non-game species, maintain and develop funding. So I think we're probably one of the only programs in the DNR that part of our job is to produce our own funding or find out our own funding. And integrate non-game management with more traditional game management practices. So that was kind of that arrow to the management section, is making sure we keep up on the research on best management practices for non-game wildlife, and making sure our managers know what that is and can implement it. So how we've tried to implement these things or work in these areas, certainly our earliest work was to reintroduce depleted or extirpated native wildlife species. Pictured right here is Blanding's turtle. Research and surveys or monitoring. Management of public and private lands. And then land acquisition to protect habitats and provide non-consumptive wildlife recreation. And this is something that I completely forgot to include in this program. It is something that we do that has also improved over time. You know, we were helping to protect land for non-game wildlife early in our program's history, but we didn't have a ton of funding to do that. And we now help buy a lot of pieces of land, usually remnant prairies, remnant marshes, but, you know, oak hickory forests, especially if they're adjacent to already protected land. You know, that's kind of where the types of land protection that we jump in on. And then, of course, we do some education and public appreciation of non-game. And I don't want to imply at all that we do this alone. There are other people, even within the DNR, that work on non-game wildlife. We have a wildlife action plan coordinator whose job is to implement that plan. We have all our habitat managers, and we also have the natural areas inventory, which are our threatened and endangered species, zoologists and botanists, and kind of. Sorry, it's time for me to take my bites. I'm gonna turn that off. But anyway, so all of us together, in addition to our external partners like volunteers and organizations like County Conservation Board, Iowa Natural Heritage, we kind of all come together to do wildlife conservation in the state of Iowa. Okay, so with all of that like foundation, now I'm going to talk about some of our projects across time. And I'll probably spend a big chunk of time talking about our volunteer programs because that's what I'm most familiar with. But I want to talk a little bit about all the things we do, and starting with wildlife restoration, because that's been probably the biggest and flashiest part of our program. So in the 1980s, how many of you knew Bruce Erzman or know Bruce Erzman? A lot of you, that's him at the top of the ladder there, with a landowner putting up a barn owl box and checking a barn owl box. He has always been kind of a daredevil. So in the 1980s, the three species that we were kind of focused on initially was the river otter, barn owls, which we released 200 barn owls in the state. In the 1980s, or between 81 and 85, and then American kestrel. And we didn't introduce any kestrels, but we had kind of a revolutionary program of putting nest boxes on the back of highway signs, which you can see up there. And there's a nice booklet that kind of talks about that program. It actually was very successful in increasing the number of kestrels in the state. And unfortunately, like road safety rules have skyrocketed, you know, have gotten much stricter since then. And so we aren't really allowed to put up more boxes or maintain the boxes that existed, but certainly providing more cavities was pretty useful for kestrels. And I'll talk about kind of successes as we go. In the 1990s, while we were still working on kestrels and otters and barn owls. We also got into our first greater prairie chicken reintroduction in the late 80s and early 1990s. Peregrine falcons, osprey, and trumpeter swans. Peregrine falcons hadn't been found in the state in over 100 years when they were reintroduced. And interestingly, they were hacked in urban areas on the tops of buildings because it mimicked their natural habitat, which is cliff faces, but it also kept them more protected from predation, from like raccoons or things that could get at them in their more natural habitat. Being in an urban setting and on big sky rises really helped. And the very first peregrine nest in the state and hack thing was on the US Bank building in Cedar Rapids, so not too far away down the road. And then also trumpeter swans down there, which I'm sure many of you, how many of you have been to a program where you got to touch a swan or see one up close? Okay, not as many people as I would think. Dave Hoffman really got around with the swans. So, in the, okay, we can go forward. So in the 2000s, and this like encompasses 2000 to now, we have had a lot more diversity as well as in how we are approaching species restoration. So we did greater prairie chickens again. You might say, what, why? Like if it failed the first time, but we had a lot of good reasons. And we did bring in a bunch more chickens between 2012 and 2017. Unfortunately, that's probably one of our failure stories with this. But we've been working with landings turtles, and that reintroduction is kind of unique in that we're not focused on bringing new adult turtles or individuals into the state and releasing them. But the thing with landings turtles is you rarely find young turtles, and they just don't have good survivability as big turtles. And so we have been putting transmitters on the female turtles and then following them to their nest site, seeing where they nest. That's given us some good information about where these guys usually head to nest. Then we protect the nest site. When the babies hatch, take the babies and take them to a facility. UNI has been one of the places that raised some, and then Blank Park Zoo basically head started the babies, which basically meant they fed them and gave them a nice safe place to grow for a year before then releasing them back where they came from. So it gave them some weight, grew them up a little bit before releasing them and hoping to increase survivability. And a lot of those young also have transmitters on them in order to, you know, kind of track that. Eastern Massasauga rattlesnake and the monarch butterfly, we're not really introducing individuals, and actually we have like the state expert on Massasauga rattlesnake and Terry right here. But a lot of those efforts have been focused on habitat restoration and surveys. And then with things like powasheet skipperling, which is a butterfly, and the rusty patch bumblebee, with those really what was needed was learning more about what habitats they use and you know, what even do they need to succeed, because we just don't know that much about them. Powasheet skipperlings are extirpated from the state. They may end up being reintroduced, but we don't really know what habitat needs they have. Like, we know where they used to be found, but we don't know why they went extinct from those areas. And currently, powasheets are only known from 2 locations in the entire world, Michigan and Ontario. And the rusty patch bumblebees have really complicated life histories. They winter in woodlands in one location, they build nests in another location. They have 3 different, you know, they have queens and workers and males. So learning all of that and learning what they need for all those life stages has been a focus of a lot of research for restoration of that species. So a lot of successes have come out of this. Obviously, river otters did so well that they're not even They don't even need non-game protection anymore. They are a fur bearer species that can be tracked. Osprey and peregrines, ospreys have been growing, and probably our biggest thing with ospreys now is that they really love cell towers a lot. And like, it's basically like these cell phone companies built osprey nest platforms everywhere around the state. And, so they build on like, I think 80% of our nests are now on cell towers, which, aggravates the cell tower people when they come to do stuff. They've got giant birds dive bombing them, which isn't fun. So, that's something we kind of deal with. Peregrines haven't taken off quite as much as osprey, but they stayed pretty stable, and we still have a number of nesting pairs in the state that are doing pretty well. And then trumpeter swans have also really taken off and are generally stable or increasing in the state. So a lot of these, not everything was successful. Kestrels did great with just providing more cavities for them to nest. They're maybe starting to decline a little bit now, again, but they're still really good and healthy populations in the state. And I would honestly say of all the things we tackled, probably prairie chickens is the most heartbreaking. Of course, that's the project I worked most closely on, so I don't want to talk about it. Okay. So basically, imperiled species have always been a priority for us, but our techniques and how we think about those restorations has changed quite a bit. And of course, we worked with a lot of partners on these things. And we definitely have some ideas of things in the future. We've talked about crotchfish frogs, which have been extirpated from the state since the 1950s. But, you know, you always get surprises like, you know, since I've been a biologist here since 2005, there's always been 2 populations of blue spotted salamanders, and Tom Schulke found a 3rd population just the other week in a new location. So there's always also more to learn and know about what species are out there. Okay, so just briefly about outreach and education. So in the past, like from 1985, actually probably to maybe 2008, we had paper newsletters that we sent out to everybody with lots of articles, kind of like what you all do in we then switched to more email. We would produce the newsletter, but then email it. And then starting in 2018, we got on Gov Delivery, where we just send like an article in email form. And if you want to sign up for that, we do send out some cool information, but that's changed quite a bit. We did a lot of in-person events, Bald Eagle Days, Pelican Festival. A lot of our reintroductions also had a component of getting people up close and personal with the species. This is Dave Hoffman. He was notorious for, not notorious, that's not the right word. He was famous for getting trumpeter swans and connecting people with them, and did a fantastic job with that. And then we did many talks for many organizations. Now, you know, we have these e-newsletters, or just not even newsletters, they're just articles that get sent out. A lot of our events are online. We do a lot of our trainings for the volunteer programs online now. There's social media, which we don't run our own social media. The DNR has one, and we kind of try and talk to them about getting more non-game content into it. And then the county conservation boards in the state do a lot of amazing work, and they're kind of locally based, and they do a lot of environmental education. So we work more with them to deliver that environmental education, and just try and support them with information or materials or products that they might need to use for that. And while some of this is maybe, I don't know, I have mixed feelings about it. I think definitely in-person events like this are definitely very valuable, but being able to do our frog and toad trainings, for example, online has allowed the opportunity for many more people to get involved. Because if you're just doing 2 or 3 workshops a year, you know, at 2 or 3 locations in the state, you know, obviously you're the pool of people that can come to that one date is limited, whereas with online workshops, we can reach a lot more people. And in fact, the number of people helping with the Frog and Toad survey has really skyrocketed in the last few years. Okay. So this is where I'm going to spend a lot of time because this is the stuff that I work with the most. So research first. I put better in quotes because it's not better. We don't do better research now. It's just that in the past, we just had one source of funding for research projects. They were, and it was usually $1,000 and it's limited to a single year. So they were fairly short and fairly local research projects, or they were just contributing to a bigger research project. And these are a couple of the early ones. Terry, is this one even? Is it really? Oh. Well, there you go. So we just contributed a tiny little bit of money to your master's thesis. And the other one was evening bats and looking at their roosting ecology at a particular site in state. So really good stuff, but just it was very limited what funding we could provide. So in 2001, and I'll talk about this in a little bit, we got this federal funding, state wildlife grants that came in, and it really increased our ability to support research projects in the state. We don't do a ton of research directly, but we work really closely with partners at the universities, with contractors and stuff to get research done. And since 2001, we've supported over 40, and this is probably an undercount, research projects focused in Iowa. We've, dealt with such burning questions as wind turbines and bird mortality, bald eagles and lead poisoning, bobcat populations, the status of Leonard's and a toy skipper in the state. And a lot of our research focuses on the response of non-game to land management techniques and habitat management techniques. And if anybody really wants to do a deeper dive, we have some one-pagers that describe some of the projects, and I brought a selection of them. I've got like 5 copies here. If folks really want to read about some of the projects that we've supported. And then we still have our small research project grants, but instead of $1,000, we bumped it up to $2,500, and now in the last couple of years to $5,000. So we've continued to fund those smaller, for smaller questions, and we've probably funded over 70 of those since 2001. So really this is not something that's super visible to people, but we're putting a lot of funding out there for non-game Iowa focused research. What we do most of is monitoring wildlife. So any guesses how many non-game wildlife species there are in the state?
80,000.
That's pretty good. And I'm not sure if it's not correct. So I don't know the net, we don't know the number. So if you include insects, it's thousands of species, probably 10,000. I don't know that it gets to 80,000, but possibly. And so monitoring of species is what we do. We don't have a built-in monitoring or data source like hunting game species do with like license sales and hunt, the number of deer killed and stuff like that the game species can do. So we have to go out there and kind of sweep our species. Early on, we were involved with the breeding bird survey, though it's now coordinated by Iowa Audubon. We did the breeding bird atlas, was one of our first projects in 1985 to 1990. And then right here, and then we repeated it in 2007 to 2012. Did any of you participate in 2007 to 12? Awesome, thank you very much. There's a really great website that looks at comparisons between the Breeding Bird Atlas 1 versus Breeding Bird Atlas 2. And this book is awesome, and the web page is awesome. Lots of really good information in there about our breeding birds. We got involved In 1991 was a big year for monitoring. We got involved with the Bald Eagle Midwinter Survey, which was a nationally coordinated survey. And then we also started the Frog and Toadfall Survey statewide, which we stole from Wisconsin, that developed it and started it in the mid-1980s. And then we've been doing bird nest monitoring, particularly of eagles, peregrines, ospreys, and colonial waterbirds, kind of all through this time frame, but it really solidified and became a more robust and rigorous survey around about 2010. So the program that we know now. And then more recent than that, we've got acoustic bat surveys started in 2014, which is a partner with Iowa State. And finally, last year, we had the Bumblebee Atlas that started in the state. Again, a partnership with the Xerces Society in Iowa State. So I'm going to dive a little deeper into these 4 surveys that are primarily done by community scientists and by a lot of people in here. So over time, obviously, this is the number of volunteers by the different surveys, and it's really an estimate. There's actually probably many more because this is really counting like the contact person for a route or a bald eagle nest or whatever. It doesn't count the people that go along with those contacts. Obviously, the Frog and Toad survey has had the most people since it's been going since 1991. In total, we've had almost 1,400 volunteers. So talking about the Frog and Toad call survey, it's been going since 1991. And over almost 7,000 surveys have been conducted at 2,500 wetlands. And we've had over 72,000 detections of frogs and toads. And I want to say also that while that's the easiest thing to present, actually all the non-detections are also really important. So there's actually double the data because we want to know not only where frogs and toads are, but also where they aren't. So lots of good data here. So this is a 30+ year data set. It's something pretty rare for non-game species to have, is this really long data set that's been collected in almost the exact same way over time. So for the 30-year anniversary, we worked on a paper to look at a little more rigorously what the trends for the different species are across that time frame, how they're responding to changes in precipitation in the state, as well as changes to land use. So this was kind of, including variables that might be affecting the data. We have increasing trend for quite a few species of frog and toad in the state. Cricket frogs, American toads, Cope-spurred tree frog, northern leopard frog, and chorus frog. And the cricket frog is particularly interesting. It's a species that is endangered to the north of us in Wisconsin and Minnesota, but Iowa's populations are doing really well. We also have a few species that have more of a decreasing trend, and then the eastern gray tree frog, which just has been steady in those last 30 years. The other kind of interesting thing, and there was several, but just to not go too deeply into things, most of the species reacted negatively to development of either agriculture or urban, except for chorus frogs and American toads. And it's not that those 2 species loved it and responded really well to it, but they just didn't, they were able to adapt to that increase in development. So that paper I don't think has come out yet, but I'm happy to share it when it does. So bald eagle nest monitoring, which I know a lot of you participate in, has been such an incredible thing to be involved with, and watch the volunteers who collect these data. I was reading the 1985 diversity newsletter, and it was saying, like, hurrah, from 1981 to 1985, we produced 4 eagles from nests, from one nest in Northeast Iowa. We now have, and these are conservative estimates, likely over 637 active nests in the state, and we've produced over almost 3,000 fledglings since 2010. So new eagles into the population, just really incredible. You can see they're very well spread out. They started by building up in the eastern part of the state and have been filling in a lot in the western part of the state where the habitat isn't quite as good. We use metrics, and this is all data that volunteers collect that help us monitor the population. And one of the big ones we use is the average number of young per nest, which has consistently stayed above 1 and has been all good since 2010, except in 2022. And any current volunteers cannot answer this question, but does anybody who's not a volunteer have any guesses why 2022 didn't go well?
Rachel?
That's a good guess. It wasn't the ratio, but vortex. No, that's a good one. It's not weather related. It was disease related, but not COVID.
Volunteers.
Yeah. It was avian influenza. That was the big year that we had avian influenza, especially during the nesting season. And it really hit the young birds hard. It was especially useful to have the data in 2023 and 2024, which showed that they rebounded pretty well in those 2 years, which kind of tells us that HPAI affected the young birds, but didn't necessarily take out a lot of the adult birds, or they were able to at least fill in the gaps in the years down the road. So we are coming up on the 20-year anniversary of delisting for the bald eagles. They were delisted in 2007 from the federal endangered species list, and as you can see, the brown is nest numbers, and the green is our winter survey, that bald eagle winter survey. And eagles are doing pretty well, and they've increased. So we're talking about, we have 80,000 species we have to take care of. So we've been talking about how can we keep collecting data on the species, especially since it gives us really important information like how they responded to avian influenza in 2022 and how they rebounded. And they're not out of the woods completely. There are still things that could come in and really impact them. But how do we also prioritize and move our monitoring efforts onto other species that may be struggling more? So we're working on how to, I think we want to continue the monitoring, but how can we do it in a way that isn't, that kind of scales back on the amount of time. And of course, most of the work is done by volunteers. And so we've at least got that going, and we just need to figure this out by 2027. And if you go forward, one of the things we're doing in preparation for it is developing an integrated population model. And also this is a habitat suitability model just on the Mississippi River that shows kind of where there is eagle habitat and where there isn't. Mississippi River has great habitat pretty much everywhere on it. It's like bald eagle heaven. So it shows that there's a lot of habitat along there. Both of the people that I've been working with this on are Tyler Harms. Many of you probably know him. He's our biometrician, and the person who's worked on this modeling have both been blown away by the quality and amount of data we have on bald eagles nesting in the state. And that's all due to the volunteers and the quality data they're collecting. And what did you say, Tom? You surveyed 50 nests in how many counties?
10
counties. Like that kind of passion and willingness to devote time is inspiring, and leads to us having data sets that we can really do some cool things with. So acoustic bat monitoring. This is just expanded statewide last year with ISU. We've got little grid cells all over the state. And this is a thing that technology has made more possible. In the past, when we wanted to study bats, we had to put up mist nets, catch the bats, handle them. It was stressful for the bats. It exposed the researcher to things, and also was just a lot of work. So if you want to go to the next slide, technology has been, really useful with, bats and monitoring. We now have, recorders that can record the bats' echolocation calls. And we can put microphones on volunteers' cars, they suction cup it to the top of their car, and then they just drive real slow along a predetermined route. And it collects bat data that's of any bats that fly over the house, over the car. And then we use artificial intelligence, can analyze that data and turn those sound files and tell us what species that we're hearing from most species. So much less, like it pretty much doesn't affect the bats at all, and is honestly a fun nighttime drive for most volunteers that help with it.
Then they also have the stationary.
Yes, and we have stationary sites as well that get put in one location in this grid. So the mobile driving and the stationary work together to give kind of a really full, complete picture of what bats are in the area. So if you want to, so the reason why we care about bats, if you want to, there should be, if you move over that map there, might be a thing that plays. I don't know. Like if you can, like the map, there should be a. It's okay if it doesn't. Basically what happens, that's 2000 with little brown bats. They used to be one of our most common bats in the country. They were one of our most common bats in the States. In Iowa, them and big brown bats were the main species that people found in their homes. And since 2006, I believe, white nose syndrome, which is a fungus that affects bats when they're hibernating, moved into the United States on the East Coast, and it just basically decimated their population. And a couple of other species as well, that tend to hibernate in caves and hibernate in groups, so they can easily pass it around to each other. And with the acoustic bat monitoring, we were able to look at trends. So myotis is a group, they're all pretty badly affected by white nose syndrome. They are hard to tell, their echolocation calls are hard to tell apart. But as a group, they kind of respond badly to white nose syndrome. So we can look at them as a group. And you can see we have routes in central Iowa and southern Iowa and then eastern Iowa. And eastern Iowa was where they were the most to start with, because most of the good bat habitat is in eastern Iowa. And it's shown, and this stopped around 2018, and it's shown a precipitous decline in those species. So kind of documenting how white nose syndrome has impacted the bats. But you can also see that even though numbers were lower in central Iowa, it hasn't gone down as much. They've stayed pretty steady. So maybe not being impacted as much in central Iowa by white nose syndrome. So that's kind of what this survey is helping us do. And then final thing, volunteer opportunity I want to talk about is the Bumblebee Atlas. Did anybody here participate this year? Yes. And you were frustrated.
It was
But-
interesting, it was a learning experience.
Yes.
I have a lot to learn.
You did great, actually. You were, I think, harder on yourself than you needed to be. But the Bumblebee Atlas started last year, and basically Iowa was covered with these grid cells that are pretty big. There's 57 of them. And in our first year, we covered 31 of them, which is pretty darn good, with 36% participants and 148 surveys. I know for a fact with the 2025 data, we've had over 69 people participate, so almost doubled. And all the colored squares, you can see where we collected data in 2024, and I'm pretty sure a lot of those diagonal, the ones that had no surveys last year got filled in this year. This is a really fun project, and it is demanding of the volunteers who have to go through training to learn how to identify bumblebees, and you go out and catch them, you put them on ice, they take a little nap, you take them out, you take lots of pictures of them. and you put those in the database online, for the Xerces Society, and they kind of vet every, picture. So it's an enormous project, and it's really given us a ton of cool data in Iowa. These are the main species, if you want to click again, that we found in Iowa. And if you can see, the number 3 species in 2024 abundant was American bumblebee. This is a species that's being considered for federal listing. So Iowa is going to be a really important state for that species, for the conservation of that species. We also had records of southern plains bumblebee and rusty patch bumblebee. Rusty patch is already a federally listed species, and southern plains is another one of those conservation concern species. So Iowa has is building up a really good data set for these species, where they occur, how abundant they are. And then I can't, so that's kind of our volunteer community science surveys, but I can't, I'm not going to dive deep into these, but I have to mention our multiple species inventory and monitoring project, which before this project was put into place, which has the goal of inventorying and then monitoring all the wildlife in Iowa, except for some of the insect groups. Definitely most of the vertebrates, but also mussels and some insects across the entire state. And before this, the last time an inventory was done in the state was in the 1930s. So this has been amazing. It is one of the bigger and more impressive projects in the country. And given that, again, we have 5 full-time staff in the diversity program. We're a small program, don't have a ton of funding, but with the help of people and support, we can get pretty crazy amounts of things done. And I'll also mention the next slide, the MODIS project, which I know y'all are probably familiar with as well. And this is what Iowa looks like now. I don't know if you can see, like, okay, so this is Iowa. Look at all those stations. Anna has done an incredible job, like, as well as all the partners. I think you all funded a station.
3, yeah. No,
3.
6.
Okay, yeah, like, just this collects an incredible amount of data on migratory bird species and how they're moving through the state. I just had an email from Riggs, who works on this project today, that we got our first bat detection on one of the towers. So it gives us really important data on migrating species and where they are in Iowa. And we've got pretty much a complete east-west fence, as well as starting to cover those rivers, which Anna deserves a lot of credit for getting this up and running. Okay, to wrap up, I want to talk a little bit about our funding, just to kind of give some perspective also. So go the next. So as I said, our program was started with the chickadee checkoff on the state tax form, and that still exists. Again, it's donation-based, it's not required. In the 80s, it was bringing in about $200,000, which was enough to pay for staff and support the complete operations of the program. But it's gone down a little bit, but nicely has stayed pretty steady at about 150,000 since then. Unfortunately, 150,000 isn't the same now as it was in 1990 and the 1980s. So it's still a really important funding source for our program, but obviously it can't support the entire program anymore. And this, it's kind of amazing, and this also heartens me, is the number of donors has been going down, but the amount of money has stayed steady. You can also see that we had a huge spike in donations in 2020 during COVID, which just warms your heart and like makes you have faith in humanity. Okay. So 2001 was kind of a game changer for us. I alluded to this several times, but we had been advocating for sustainable funding for non-game wildlife with the federal Congress for many, many years. It ended up dying in 2001 when 9/11 happened, but they did manage to put in place state wildlife grants, which allocates a certain amount of funding to every state for non-game work every year. It is an annual appropriation, so we kind of have to ask for it every year. So it's not really sustainable, but it's been a really bipartisan supported program. And it's really a drop in the bucket of the federal budget. I think the entire thing was 87 million, is nothing in federal budget. But that being put into place, led the Iowa legislature to also change some things about our natural resource license plates, which also directed some of that funding to the diversity program. Because we need to match those federal dollars and we didn't have the funding to do it. So the license plates helped us do that. So the two things together upped our budget from 150,000 to $1 million. So really huge boon. The money from the license plates and from state wildlife grants is project-based. We can't really add a ton of staff with those money and stuff, but it has really increased the amount of research and the amount of work we can do, the amount of land protection we can do. And just like between 2001 and 2015, this is kind of a look at all the projects that were done and how much work got done in that time frame. So just everywhere. So in conclusion, these are also not necessarily sustainable, and they, the license plates have stayed steady, but kind of decreased a little bit. So we still have some work to do on the funding down the road and getting something sustainable like Pittman Robertson or Dingle Johnson for non-game. But honestly, things have been pretty rosy since 2001 for us, and we've really been able to do a lot more work. Yeah, it's going to be changing. So wrap up. We've always had the same core values in the diversity program, and I think they're the values that we share with all of our community scientists and with actually a lot of people in Iowa. And they are that we want to do conservation based on data. We want to make sure that we have good data to work with that will then inform our conservation actions and make sure we're doing things with efficiency and that are going to make the most difference. Volunteers and partners are really, really essential and so important to what we do. We cannot do it without you. As I said, that funding has been amazing, but we haven't added much staff. So if you all were here doing what you do and also helping with our community science projects, you would not be anywhere. And then finally, all native wildlife has value. So we want to work and make sure that everything has conservation, including insects and all those things. We love them all. And so, yeah, with that, I'm obviously like, I love butterflies and bumblebees. So I like to think that I draw them to magically. So I know that was all over the place and was kind of like a crazy journey, but I just wanted to, I hope you feel good about how things have gone in the state for non-game wildlife for the last several years and the role that you all have played as, fans of birds and non-game wildlife in the state. And I'm happy to answer any questions that anybody has. I also brought some stuff that you can take, some brochures and stuff.
Right by the donation box. Okay.
Yeah. Yes.
Why are the baby blending turtles kept at UNI?
So Jeff Tamplin is a professor there that works on reptiles and amphibians a lot, and we had a state wildlife grant program with him, a research project with him on wood turtles, and I'm honestly not sure how he got roped in to taking care of the first landing turtle babies, but that's,
Did he find
His
some-
lab was set up with the, like that with the baby.
that's,
He already had the equipment.
Didn't he find some along the Beaver River and that brought him here in the first place?
with turtles,
That's really interesting.
yeah. Yeah, and we subsequently got a state wildlife grant and had a graduate student at Iowa State that was working on this as well with landing turtles in central Iowa, and Blank Park Zoo has been a partner on that to and start those babies. I think we had like 70 some babies. Wow. This past year that having it released, and hopefully all survive. Probably not all gonna survive, but hopefully they have a better chance. Yes,
I'm sorry to bring up the greater Prairie chicken.
yeah, it's okay. It's okay.
I was really sorry to learn that they had less state.
Yeah.
Wondering if there's any plans to be introduced to the state.
Yeah, so probably, we're in discussions about that now, but probably not. We'll see how that goes, but greater prairie chickens as a whole globally, their population is struggling a bit. You know, there's still good numbers in Kansas, Nebraska, and South Dakota, and there's still huntable populations in that state. But that's really the only place they are, in really good numbers. So the question becomes, what is best for prairie chickens at the global scale? And it's probably not to bring another 500 chickens from Nebraska or Kansas and put them in Iowa where they seem to all die. Or just not be able to thrive. The good news about the prairie chicken thing, and I need to keep this in mind always, is while prairie chickens have not necessarily thrived in that landscape, if you've ever been to Kellerton or Ringgold Wildlife Area or just south of the border at Dunn Ranch in Missouri, Pawnee Prairie, that landscape is a premier grassland landscape. It is gorgeous. Every other grassland wildlife species you can think of is there and thriving. It's just, and all of that is that way because of the prairie chicken. So it helped kind of be the umbrella to create this really amazing landscape for grassland species. Unfortunately, it's just not. Yes.
Regarding the bald eagle, is there a correlation between health confinements and the increase in population?
So we are looking at that with the habitat suitability map I showed you that was just for Mississippi. We're also doing, you know, all the other parts of Iowa and hog confinements. We just recently were able to track down information on hog confinements, because yes, we definitely, at least for some nests, like that's their main source of food for sure. Like they're out in the middle of nowhere close to water. So we'll see if it's enough to make a difference to their population, but yeah, we're looking at that.
Are there the surrounding Midwestern states, as their population have a corresponding increase to what Iowa has?
Yeah, and I don't know that I've looked at specifically. I think they don't, no other states monitor them quite as well as we do. Michigan maybe does, but the states above us, Minnesota, Wisconsin, and Michigan are production states. They have well over 1,000 nesting pairs that are loaded with eagles up there. So I think they're stable and doing well up there. But it was interesting that avian influenza might have had a bigger impact to the north and in those states with more eagles than it did here.
One more thing.
Yeah.
You do anything with alien invasive species into the country?
So not at that level, but we certainly deal with them when they get to Iowa or if they become a problem here. And like actually a lot of things like the plants and stuff that come in are more run by eyeballs and Department of Land Stewardship, but yeah. nothing specific, but, we definitely keep an eye on those things. Yes.
Is there a particular finding that has come out of the volunteer monitoring program that just surprised you, or something that you most remember stuff was?
I mean, there's a lot of things. I mean, we had an evil nest that raised 4 young to fledging, which like even, Kelly McKay, who's like Mr. Eagle, was like, nope, can't happen. But we had photographs from the volunteer that there were definitely, 4 eaglets, and just the amount that they have, the population has grown and, like the level of success the nests have, like having that information that is really mind-blowing. Like they do a really good job, and volunteers do a great job of like documenting.
There's so many places that you can, put data out there. I naturalist services, are there those organizations, or which ones report to you? I mean, do they share that data, or do you have to ask for it?
So we can obviously, because the data is public, we can look at it, and we could probably request certain data as well, but they don't automatically share data with us. But I use iNaturalist all the time for recording incidental sightings of cool things and stuff like that. So, and there's also, some really nice AI programs that help with identification of especially insects and stuff. But yeah, we don't, while we keep an eye on those things, we don't necessarily have a relationship where they're giving us data. I know that for Rusty Patch Bumblebee, the Fish and Wildlife Service does get data from Bumblebee Watch and iNaturalist to help with monitoring that species, as well as from the Bumblebee Atlas.
So, the species that you're keeping an eye on, I'm just curious, when I look at the threatened and endangered species of concern, there's probably others out there that you have your eye on that aren't on the list that maybe could be, that we could maybe be looking at. Is that a kind of public list, like, well, this species we're concerned about, but it takes a while to get on the actual list. And we can look for it and report it.
Yeah.
And then we find things too that are just a little bit out of range, that are Minnesota, Wisconsin, that are moving down, and then Missouri, south, like armadillos coming in.
Yes.
All that
And
stuff.
Jim Coffey is our armadillo biologist. So, like, he's our forest wildlife biologist, and he's gotten the armadillo tether around that. But, yeah, so I think those species of greatest conservation need lists in the wildlife action plan are actually a really good resource for that, to see species that are, it's gonna include the TNE species, but it also includes a lot of other species that are just, for one reason or another, experts on those groups of animals are concerned about them, or they have some vulnerabilities. So that's a really good place to kind of look for a list of like, okay, what should I look for? And Anna would kill me if I didn't mention, I don't know if you're familiar with bird conservation areas. There's lots of landscapes around the state that have been established as important conservation areas for birds, and each of those has a checklist of birds that might be there, and it, has an asterisk by all the species of greatest conservation needs, so you can use that to kind of see if you can find those species in the BCA. And I should say, eBird data, I'm sure a lot of you use eBird, that gets used in a lot of applications as well, usually at a larger scale than Iowa, but it's really all that, crowdsourced data is really useful as well. Like the monitoring program we do is kind of more of a same species trend across time. It is a lot more repetitive, But there's also room for just individual, species like birdless and a random bumblebee find or whatever, and reporting those things for sure. Any other questions? Okay, yes,
Just, maybe to drive this point home.
yeah,
How, approximately how many game species are there in this thing?
oh goodness, maybe 35, 40, I get confused because there's a lot of waterfowl.
How many game biologists?
Um, 6 or 7.
Along with all their other staff,
Yeah, it's still probably about 7-ish. Like, it's not a huge group, but they are, each one is focused on a species or 2 species.
so there's 7 or 8 people dealing with 35 species, and we've already established you have 80,000 species.
Totally using that number. Yeah. And that's why it is so important, why help from volunteers is so important. Because there's just no way that we could keep track of everything. But I just think there has been, Karen always, who's our program coordinator, always tells Iowa the little state that could, because even though we don't have a ton of resources, we have good people and we really accomplished some pretty amazing things. And it's not just us, the professionals, it's everybody. Maybe not everybody, but a lot of good people. All right, well, thank you so much. Thanks for having me.